Boston wakes early, and with it, Clara Bennett awakens too. The insistent sound of the alarm clock can barely compete with the discreet hum of the dialysis machines in the next room, where Sophie, her 18-year-old sister, rests exhausted. Clara turns off the alarm, takes a deep breath, and faces yet another day that always feels larger than her own strength. The hospital camera follows her silent ritual. Clara returns home, prepares a strong cup of coffee, mentally reviews her endless to-do list, and checks the stack of bills piled on the kitchen table. Each envelope carries a reminder of what she cannot fail to pay: the rent, the medical expenses, the installments for the treatment keeping Sophie alive. She dresses in simple clothes, picks up the worn-out handbag she uses daily, and crosses the small apartment. Before leaving, she stops by her sister's room, holding on to the certainty that Sophie will soon be home again. She smiles tenderly, as if that small gesture were enough to hide the exhaustion consuming her. For Clara, each day begins the same way, leaving herself behind in order to carry the weight of others. At the subway station, crowded cars press together countless invisible stories. Clara blends into the masses, but her mind is elsewhere. On the sketches she must finish, the reports waiting for her review, the budget meeting that could determine her team's future. The clock counts down every lost minute, and she quickens her steps through the freezing streets until she reaches the towering building of the architecture firm where she works. The office greets her with white light, ringing phones, and glowing screens. Co-workers rush past her, some asking for help, others dropping piles of documents on her desk without waiting for a response. Clara breathes deeply, organizes everything with method and discipline, and plunges into endless hours of calculations, blueprints, and reports. While others complete their 8-hour shift, she knows her workday will be twice, sometimes 3 times as long. Breaks are rare, meals rushed. A sandwich eaten at her desk has become her daily lunch. By the time the building begins to empty, Clara is still there, revising an urban planning project worth millions to the firm. Her eyes burn, yet her mind pushes forward. Each time her body falters, she thinks of Sophie, the machine beside her bed, and the hopeful look in her sister's eyes whenever she hears news that her treatment may advance. That hope is what keeps Clara standing. When she finally leaves the office, night has already fallen. Boston glows with artificial lights, but Clara has no time to admire the city. She hurries to her second job, freelance modeling work she completes at home. The camera lingers on the small apartment, lit only by the glow of her computer screen, as Clara types and adjusts technical details while fighting off sleep. In the background, Sophie stirs softly and asks for a glass of water. Clara stops everything to tend to her with patience. Caring for her sister knows no fatigue. It is the one space where her tenderness can truly exist. Hours pass until the clock strikes past 2 in the morning. Clara shuts down the computer, massages her temples, and allows herself a moment of silence. She looks at the bills, now a little less threatening, yet still suffocating. Her body begs for rest, but her heart demands more effort. And though she knows dawn will bring the same relentless race, she lies down on the sofa, often leaving the bed for Sophie, who needs the greater comfort. At last, she closes her eyes for just a few brief minutes. The cycle restarts without pause, and the narration makes clear: Clara is not just a young professional. She is the pillar of an entire life, a sister, a provider, someone who, though shattered by exhaustion, refuses to fail. In this routine of silent sacrifice, the viewer begins to understand the weight she carries, and how her body is already warning that it cannot sustain this much longer. The third day of that week seemed like just another in Clara Bennett's endless routine. The office buzzed with meetings, deadlines, and pressure, but she no longer heard the voices around her clearly. Sitting at her computer, eyes fixed on the screen, she tried to revise a calculation that dissolved into confused numbers before her weary gaze. The air conditioning blew cold, but her skin burned as if with fever. Her body no longer obeyed the discipline her mind demanded. A tremor shook her hands, and the pen slipped to the floor. She bent to pick it up, but vertigo came first. The room spun, sounds distorted. Her heart raced in uneven beats, and then everything gave way. Clara collapsed beside her desk, unconscious, to the shock of her colleagues. The impact echoed across the floor, breaking conversations, sparking panic. A cry went out for the emergency team, and in seconds, the office became a stage of tension. People crowded, anxious eyes searching for answers, while Clara lay motionless, breathing with difficulty. Amid the chaos, someone hastily gathered her fallen handbag. Papers scattered, medical receipts, crumpled cards. Among them, something slipped quietly to the floor. A small white case, marked with 2 unmistakable red lines. A pregnancy test. It rolled slowly until it stopped against the base of the desk. And there it remained, silent, a secret revealed with no witnesses. Minutes later, the ambulance siren broke through the routine. 2 paramedics rushed in, checked her vital signs, and placed an oxygen mask over her face. The stretcher was prepared quickly, and Clara, pale and fragile, was carried out under the eyes of the entire team. Some whispered, others only watched in silence, but unease spread among them all. In the company's lobby, Daniel Whitmore, the CEO, was awaiting a board meeting. The news of Clara's collapse reached him within seconds, carried by hurried whispers. Without hesitation, he interrupted his schedule and went down to the floor. When the elevator doors opened, the corridor was already filled with the movement of paramedics. His eyes found Clara being wheeled away on the stretcher. The young woman he had only known through reports and quiet mentions now seemed fragile, on the verge of breaking. Something stirred in him, a sudden memory of Elena, the wife he had lost years before in a hospital. Daniel walked outside, following the paramedics to the ambulance. He said nothing, but he made sure to trail the vehicle all the way to the hospital, driven by a mix of duty and instinct. The silence inside the company car was heavy. He thought of Clara's dedication, the flawless reports, the relentless effort that always seemed disproportionate to her role. There was something beyond work, something he still didn't understand. Back at the office, the floor had calmed, but the detail remained. Beside Clara's desk, forgotten in the corner, lay the pregnancy test. When Daniel later returned to collect her personal belongings and hand them to his assistants, he noticed the object, his eyes fixed on the red lines. Undeniable. His heart raced. He allowed himself no outward reaction, only a deep breath held in silence. It was intimate information, perhaps revealed by accident. A dilemma arose immediately. Should he confront her or respect her privacy? Could the test belong to someone else? The weight of that discovery piled atop the shock of seeing her collapse before everyone's eyes. As night settled over Boston, the office returned to a quieter rhythm, but Daniel remained thoughtful. In his mind, the image of the young analyst on the floor and the small object by her desk formed an unfinished story, heavy with unanswered questions. Clara's secret, until then buried beneath layers of effort and silence, was beginning to surface, ready to alter not only her path, but his as well. St. Joseph Hospital was bathed in the first light of morning when Clara slowly opened her eyes. The white ceiling, the steady beep of the monitors, and the sharp scent of disinfectant immediately reminded her of the fragility of her own body. She tried to move, but fatigue held her down. Only when she turned her head did she notice the unexpected presence. Seated in a chair, still in his suit, Daniel Whitmore watched her in silence. His gaze was not one of superiority or reprimand. It carried a restrained concern, rare in a man accustomed to making ruthless decisions. Clara tried to compose herself, apologizing for the trouble she had caused, but her voice faltered. Daniel stepped closer, asked her to save her strength, and explained that the doctor had ordered immediate rest. He spoke calmly, like someone who already knew that environment well. Clara was surprised by his attention, even more so when she heard that he had stayed at the hospital throughout the night, monitoring her progress. Between pauses and hesitations, she confessed that she worked endless hours to support her younger sister, Sophie, who was undergoing dialysis treatment. Her words came out almost in whispers, as if the weight of that confession shamed her. Daniel listened without interruption, only nodding gravely. When Clara finished, silence lingered for a few seconds, until he took a deep breath and admitted that now he understood the reason behind her tireless dedication. On his way back to the company, the memory of Elena, his late wife, returned with force. Daniel remembered the many nights spent in hospitals, how human fragility demanded more than professionalism. It demanded compassion. Arriving at the office, still shaken by the sight of Clara in the hospital bed, he immediately called for a board meeting. 2 days after the incident, Clara received an unexpected phone call. Her presence was requested in the company's main conference room. Still pale but determined, Clara made her way to the firm, where she entered to find Daniel and several executives awaiting her. The atmosphere, however, was not one of reprimand but of solemnity. Daniel took the floor and firmly announced that the company recognized her exceptional competence and unparalleled dedication. For that reason, she was being promoted to the position of executive assistant to the president. The news struck Clara like lightning. A doubled salary, expanded medical benefits, and the security of a health plan that would fully cover Sophie's treatment. Everything she had pursued with sacrifice now stood before her as a concrete opportunity. For an instant she considered refusing, fearing she might not be capable or physically strong enough to endure the demands. But the image of her sister, bound to the dialysis machine, returned her courage. She accepted, her voice breaking, thanking them humbly. Her colleagues received the news with surprise, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled envy. Clara, however, could only think of what the promotion meant for Sophie. Deep down, she knew Daniel's actions were not solely those of a CEO, but of someone moved by something deeper. There was in his decision an echo of pain and memory, as if Clara's story had reawakened something long dormant in his own life. Back at the hospital, Clara shared the news with her sister. Sophie, still weakened by treatment, smiled brightly, lighting up the room. Their embrace was long, filled with stifled tears. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed to offer a chance to breathe. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from a distance. He revealed to no one that he still carried the secret discovered in the office, the pregnancy test found on the floor. He held onto it as a dilemma, unsure if it even belonged to Clara, but unable to ignore the coincidence. He chose silence, offering instead tangible support, the promotion that could change both her life and Sophie's. That night, Clara returned home exhausted, but with a newfound hope. The pile of bills on the kitchen table no longer seemed quite so threatening. The road ahead would still be difficult, but now there was light. What she did not know was that by accepting Daniel's offer, she had crossed an invisible threshold. Her professional and personal lives would intertwine in ways no spreadsheet could ever predict. The days following her promotion swept by like a storm. Clara was still adjusting to her new desk, now positioned right beside Daniel Whitmore's glass office, when the reality of her situation struck with full force. The joy of the opportunity mixed with the weight of a secret growing inside her, a secret impossible to bear without consequences. Each time her hand brushed against her still discreet belly, she felt the dissonance between the image of the dedicated professional and the truth she carried within. On her first day as executive assistant, she accompanied Daniel to a high-level meeting with investors. His firm posture stood in sharp contrast to the silent tension consuming Clara. As she took notes and adjusted the presentation, her mind ran elsewhere. What would happen when they found out? Was there room for a pregnant woman in such a demanding position? She still remembered the dismissal of a colleague under similar circumstances, the memory echoing through the company's halls. Fear outweighed reason. During the break, when an employee casually mentioned the rumor of a test found in the office, Clara froze inside. She feigned surprise, laughed with rehearsed naturalness, and remarked that perhaps the object didn't even belong to anyone from the firm. The words spilled out quickly, coldly, like a barrier to shield her survival. No one questioned further, but inside her, A life continued to grow. As the days piled up, Clara immersed herself in her new routine. Endless schedules, urgent calls, confidential documents. Daniel, despite the rigidity that defined him, treated her with an unexpected attentiveness. There was in him a rare humanity, a willingness to explain processes, to hear her opinions. This closeness stirred in Clara not only admiration but also a growing fear. What if he discovered the truth? What if all the trust placed in her crumbled in an instant? At home, Sophie noticed the change. Her sister arrived later each evening, but with a different brightness in her eyes. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was shared with hope. Sophie asked what it was like working so close to the CEO, and Clara answered with simple descriptions. In the quiet moments while her sister slept, Clara sat alone at the kitchen table, stared at the bills that were finally being paid more easily, and rested her hand over her belly. The baby had become a constant reminder of the hidden truth. At the company, Daniel's trust in her deepened. He began sharing sensitive information, projects that would shape the future of the firm. Clara executed everything with precision, yet sometimes his gaze lingered longer than necessary, as though he saw in her not only an employee, but someone who could understand his own solitude. She noticed it, but said nothing. Any closer approach would only make the revelation more painful. Nights were the hardest. Lying on the couch, Clara battled against contradictory thoughts. On one side, the need to provide for Sophie and protect the baby. On the other, the feeling of betraying the trust of a man who, without asking for anything in return, had reached out his hand in the most fragile moment of her life. The conflict consumed her in silence. Each lie sustained the present, but compromised the future. On a rainy Friday, Daniel walked her to the exit of the building. The two walked side by side under the canopy, while the employees had already left. He thanked her for her dedication that week, and, almost in a personal tone, remarked that he admired her strength in the face of difficulties. Clara forced a smile, unable to respond. Inside her, the weight of contradiction nearly turned into confession, but she held herself back. That night, standing before the mirror in her room, Clara faced her reflection. Her belly was beginning to discreetly reveal the pregnancy. She touched her own body and whispered a silent promise. She would protect the baby and Sophie at all costs. The price of lying was high, but at that moment, it seemed the only path to avoid losing everything she had just begun to build. And so, the internal conflict took root, quiet but relentless, preparing the ground for the inevitable day when the truth could no longer be hidden. Clara's routine as Daniel Whitmore's executive assistant quickly assumed an unforgiving pace. Early in the morning, she was already facing crowded schedules, confirming international meetings, adjusting time zones, and reviewing financial reports that required meticulous attention. The new position left no room for distractions. A single miscalculated detail could impact decisions worth millions. Still, she carried out every task with precision, hiding her exhaustion behind a firm and focused posture. During her first week, she accompanied Daniel to external meetings with renowned architects and foreign investors. She observed the ease with which he spoke, the firmness with which he led negotiations, and she felt part of something larger. Her presence was noticed not only as an assistant, but as someone who could listen and bring order to chaos. Yet while others saw only efficiency, Clara silently carried a secret that grew beneath her discreet clothing. The baby, still invisible to the world, already pulsed as a constant reminder that time for lies was running out. Daniel, in turn, revealed himself to be different from the distant man Clara had imagined. He consulted her on decisions, accepted her observations, and in rare moments, let slip a trace of vulnerability. At the end of a particularly exhausting day, he mentioned how that hospital where Clara had once been admitted brought back painful memories. Clara did not need to ask the name of his late wife, for Daniel always touched on Elena's memory briefly, wrapped in respectful silence. One morning, while they reviewed a speech Daniel would give at a conference, Clara noticed a framed photograph on his desk. It was Elena, smiling beside Daniel in a sunlit garden. Clara discreetly looked away, but that image stayed with her all day. The weight of another woman's memory, still present in Daniel's life, mingled with the weight of the lie she herself carried. Two different ghosts, yet equally alive, surrounded the silent bond beginning to grow between them. Work brought them closer. Short trips to meetings in other cities created intervals when they could talk outside the corporate environment. Daniel asked about Sophie, showed genuine interest in her treatment, and Clara felt the barrier between boss and employee gradually dissolve. There was something in his eyes beyond professionalism, a humanity that contrasted with his public image of a ruthless businessman. However, every moment of closeness was also a threat. Clara feared that any detail, a sudden nausea, an instinctive gesture touching her belly, could reveal her condition. So she devised strategies, avoiding long meals, always carrying water to disguise discomfort, wearing loose clothes to hide subtle changes in her body. Each day endured was a silent victory, but also a burden that grew heavier. At the office, her colleagues' eyes became more attentive. Some admired her rise, others whispered in the corridors about how quickly she had earned Daniel's trust. Clara pretended not to notice, but each murmur echoed like a threat to her stability. At night, at home, Sophie watched her with attentive eyes. The younger sister sensed there was something unspoken but limited herself to smiling and thanking Clara for the tireless effort that now gave them more security. Clara, lacking the courage to reveal the pregnancy, kept the secret even from Sophie, afraid of worrying her in the midst of treatment. One afternoon, Daniel called her to review confidential documents in his office. As Clara organized the folders, a sudden dizziness forced her to lean on the desk. Daniel noticed and approached with concern, but she quickly regained her composure, claiming she was just tired. He looked at her intently, as if trying to decipher something beyond her words. For a moment, Clara thought he knew, but the silence remained. Thus, the new routine unfolded: hard work, growing closeness, Daniel's lingering memories, and a secret that became harder to conceal. Between meetings, reports, and veiled confidences, a connection was born, silent and inevitable. Yet deep down, Clara knew. The closer she grew, the more painful the revelation would one day be. The invitation to the St. Joseph Hospital Charity Gala arrived like an invitation to tension for Clara. It was an elegant event, attended by Boston's elite, influential donors and public figures, all gathered to celebrate and raise funds. For Clara, who spent her days in discreet office clothes and nights caring for Sophie, the thought of dressing in glamour and facing scrutinizing eyes brought anxiety and excitement in equal measure. On the afternoon of the event, she locked herself in the small bedroom of the apartment she shared with Sophie. Before the mirror, every gesture was meticulous, brushing her hair, rehearsing smiles, adjusting the carefully chosen dress. The elegant fabric felt heavy, but each movement smoothing the skirt sparked a flicker of confidence. Sophie, despite the fatigue of treatment, watched every detail with shining, encouraging eyes. "You're going to shine, Clara," she said, holding her hand, giving her courage. Her sister's presence was a silent reminder of why she had to face the night without hesitation. The nervousness grew as she approached the venue. Clara felt her heart race with each passing mile, imagining the stares she would meet. The illuminated streets seemed like a gallery of invisible judgments. Yet alongside the anxiety came a firm determination. She had to make everything work. Not only for herself, but for Sophie, for the baby she still kept secret, for everything she had fought so hard to build. Upon arrival, the hospital lobby, transformed into a gala stage, took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers reflected light over the improvised red carpet, and photographers moved about, capturing moments of elegance. Clara drew a deep breath, trying to adapt to the luxurious atmosphere without losing her composure. Daniel was waiting for her near the entrance, impeccable in his suit, offering his hand with an encouraging smile. He guided her through the room, discreetly introducing her to a few influential guests, making sure her presence was noticed respectfully and not merely out of curiosity. As they walked along the corridors decorated with flowers and candles, Clara felt tension intertwine with a sense of belonging. Every gesture, every word, was measured with care. The contrast between the sophisticated evening and the life she led daily was striking, and this duality made her reflect on how much she had changed since she began working with Daniel. In the main hall, groups gathered in elegant conversations. Glasses were raised in toasts, and Clara observed, analyzing every detail intently. Sensing her nervousness, Daniel offered brief words of encouragement, casually remarking on the importance of her presence there, not only as his assistant, but as someone who had helped projects at the hospital move forward. The trust implied in his words made her straighten her posture and feel that, in some way, she belonged to that world that had once seemed unreachable. Amid canapes and restrained laughter, Clara felt a pang of fear. What if someone noticed signs of her pregnancy? Every movement was calculated, every gesture concealed the truth only she knew. Even so, there was also an unprecedented sense of power. She was there, playing her role with precision, balancing her professional and personal responsibilities with a skill she never imagined she possessed. As the night went on, Clara realized that the event would not only be a test of her capability, but also the stage where her bond with Daniel would subtly grow, laying the foundation for future revelations. Between pressure, elegance, and nerves, a new Clara emerged, confident, determined, and quietly resilient, ready to face every challenge that night, and her life still held. The main hall of St. Joseph Hospital was completely transformed. Crystal chandeliers reflected light on immaculate white tablecloths, while carefully arranged flowers filled every corner, delicately perfuming the air. The murmur of Boston's elite blended with the clinking of crystal glasses and the sound of footsteps on polished floors. Clara Bennett walked alongside Daniel Whitmore, feeling every gaze fall upon them. Some curious, others admiring, all attentive to the figure of the CEO and the young assistant, who now stood in a prominent place by his side. Along the entrance, guests gathered in small groups, exchanging greetings and discreet comments. Clara, though still aware of her tension, managed to maintain the impeccable composure the role required. Daniel, attentive to her every gesture, offered a steady hand or an encouraging smile whenever needed. There was a gentleness in his presence that contrasted with the rigidity of his position. A quiet care to ensure Clara didn't feel overwhelmed in that world that still seemed distant and inaccessible. On the main stage, the microphone was set, the spotlights aimed, and Daniel was called to give his speech. The hall fell silent, and every gaze turned toward him. Clara remained at his side, slightly behind, feeling the intensity of the moment. He began to speak, his voice steady but full of emotion, reminding everyone of the importance of compassion and human care. Each word seemed to touch the hearts of the audience. Stories of patients, volunteers, and caregivers were interwoven with memories of Elena, his late wife, whose legacy lived on through the hospital wing that bore her name. As Daniel spoke, Clara felt a mixture of pride and admiration. The man before her was not just a CEO, but someone capable of turning pain into action, memories into purpose. The speech reached its peak when he announced new support programs for caregivers, highlighting the importance of helping those who silently carry impossible burdens. The audience gave a standing ovation, and Clara, moved, realized that the world she helped keep moving was not confined to spreadsheets and reports. There was a human dimension, direct and transformative. After the speech ended, Clara and Daniel were invited to mingle through the hall, greeting guests and supporters. The atmosphere was one of celebration, but also of respect and recognition. Clara noticed discreet glances cast her way, admiration, curiosity, and a few sparks of judgment. Every gesture she made, every calculated smile was observed. She felt the weight of the role she was playing, but also the quiet strength that emerged from her ability to navigate that environment. While they spoke with some donors, Clara felt a movement in her belly. The baby kicked. A small shock, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her heart race. She smiled discreetly, touching her belly in a subtle way, almost as if asking that secret to remain silent a little longer. The sensation was overwhelming and comforting at once, a life growing inside her, reminding her of the reason for all her effort, the reason she endured every pressure, every silent lie. After a few minutes, Daniel guided her away from the crowd, toward a more private corridor. The glow of the hall continued in the distance, but at that moment, the world seemed reduced to just the two of them. He remarked, in a light but attentive tone, on her dedication, on how her work had been essential to the success of the night. Clara, her heart still racing from the baby's kick, replied with a restrained smile, trying to conceal the intensity of emotions building within her. The gala, with all its grandeur and expectation, was not only a night of presentations and speeches. For Clara, it was a moment of quiet transformation, the public stage and the private world colliding, reminding her that her life, her career, and the secret she carried were about to intertwine irreversibly with Daniel's presence, creating a tension that could not yet be resolved, but that grew with every look, every gesture, every word shared in that illuminated, meaningful space. The gala was drawing to a close. The sound of the final applause echoed in the main hall as guests dispersed into small groups, discussing the speeches, the announced projects, and the hospital's role in the community. Clara Bennett remained at Daniel Whitmore's side, both still engaged in the final formalities, thanking collaborators, answering brief questions, and ensuring everything had gone as planned. The soft glow of the ceiling lights reflected on faces and crystals, but Clara hardly noticed it. Her heart was racing for another reason, a silent one that pulsed inside her. As they walked through the quieter corridors, away from the buzz of guests, Clara felt the baby move again, a discreet, almost timid motion in her lower belly. The second time she had felt it that evening. She froze for a moment, her eyes widening slightly, and a wave of fear and joy swept through her intensely. The secret she had been carrying for months, the silent weight shaping every gesture and every word, seemed to demand acknowledgement at that instant. Daniel, attentive as ever, noticed her sudden pause. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, yet filled with concern. Clara took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. But the truth could no longer be delayed. She looked at him, into his eyes, searching for courage, and finally whispered, as though speaking softly might make the confession less real. "I'm pregnant. 5 months." The impact was immediate, but not of rejection or negative surprise. Daniel stepped back, his breath caught for a few seconds, the shock evident in his expression. But contrary to Clara's fears, his reaction was not one of judgment. It was one of attention, of understanding, of silent acceptance. He didn't say anything right away, only held his gaze steady and intense, as if absorbing every word, processing not just the revelation but also the courage she showed by finally exposing her secret. Clara felt the weight she had been carrying partially lift. For months, every smile, every meeting, every gesture of closeness had been shadowed by the fear of losing her job, of disappointing Daniel, of failing Sophie. The confession was both a release and a calculated risk. She didn't know if she was ready to face all the consequences, but in that moment, she had chosen to be honest. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel stepped closer and gently placed his hand over hers, encouraging her with a simple yet deeply meaningful gesture. "You don't have to worry about me," he said firmly, with a serenity only someone truly grounded could convey. "We'll face this together." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, but not from fear or shame. For the first time, they came from relief, from hope. His support did not erase the challenges ahead. The company's internal criticism, the curious glances, the relentless pace of work, but it promised she would not have to carry everything alone. At last there was partnership, a trust that went beyond a mere professional bond. As they walked back toward the hospital exit, Clara realized the significance of that moment. It was not just the revelation of a pregnancy, but the solidifying of a relationship that had been quietly and carefully growing for months. Daniel was not only accepting the responsibility of standing by her, He was also acknowledging Clara's strength, her dedication, her courage to keep everything together for Sophie and for the baby. The cold Boston night wind swept through the hospital's open corridors, but inside Clara there was a warmth that enveloped her. The fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by the certainty that, even in the face of immense challenges, there was someone willing to face the future by her side. She felt the life growing inside her with greater intensity, almost as if the baby recognized the newfound sense of safety. When they reached the sidewalk, Daniel clasped her hand firmly, and Clara realized that simple gesture carried silent promises: protection, partnership, care. In that moment, the outside world, with its criticism and expectations, seemed less threatening. The secret that had once isolated her now united them, transforming fear into courage and challenge into opportunity. Night was closing in over Boston, but for Clara and Daniel, a new chapter was beginning. A chapter marked by courage, mutual support, and the building of a bond strong enough to withstand any obstacle. The revelation did not just mean a change in Clara's life, but the consolidation of something greater. The promise to face uncertainties together, to protect the child's future, Sophie's well-being, and the fragile balance that was now beginning to form between them. A new phase had arrived, but with it also came the hope that the future could be different, fairer, more humane, and that even in the midst of hardships, love and trust could flourish. And so ends another exciting chapter here on Enchanting Stories. If you let yourself be carried away by the story of Clara, Sophie, and Daniel, you already know this is the perfect place to dive into narratives that make your heart race. Before you close the video, I want to extend a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel and become part of this amazing community that is growing every day. Join those who love emotion, drama, and love itself. And of course, don't forget to leave a like. Every like helps spread the magic of these stories. Now tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from today? It's incredible to know our stories travel as far as each of your imaginations. Let's create a little corner together full of emotion, suspense, and unforgettable moments. So hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and come join our family of story lovers. Because here, every video is an invitation to dream, to feel, and to be enchanted. See you in the next chapter.